studio. Here's just a brief mention of the Edge TV channels. We have Daniel Lott's main channel. Daniel hosts a live show every Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Larry Cat is the host of the Spiritual channel and the show called Spiritually Speaking. Now, this airs on Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and in the future, the Edge Woman's channel will be going to air, but there is information on that page now. If you're a poet, singer and songwriter and want to become involved with the Edge or EBN that way, we have EBN Music. Also, there is the Edge Political Review. Both these channels have information on there now, videos, streaming and audio. Perhaps you want to become involved by being an Edge voluntary correspondent. An advert for this will be played later on in the break. After your initial contact, it might take us a couple of weeks to get back to you. We are quite busy at this time. Robert Allen is a Belfast-born author, journalist, researcher, publisher and media activist. His books include Billy, published by Penguin in 1986, Guests of the Nation by Earthscan in 1990, Waste Not, Want Not, also by Earthscan in 1992, No Global, published by Pluto in 2004, and The Dioxin War by Pluto in 2004 also. His up-and-coming book is called Orange, which describes the aftermath of the dioxin contamination in Vietnam after the Vietnam War. This week I spoke to Robert Allen, but before I play the interview, here is some information about dioxin you ought to know. Dioxin is the most toxic man-made substance ever created by mankind. It is so toxic it is deadly, and the American EPA have classified it as a Class A carcinogen, which actually means it will kill you. In the Vietnam War, during Operation Ranch Hand, which lasted from 1962 to the early days of 1971, some 19 million gallons of herbicide was sprayed on Vietnamese lands to remove the forest cover that shielded the Viet Cong and destroy the crops. Various formulations were used, most with mixtures of the phenoxy herbicides 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T. The different formulations were named according to the color-coded drums they were shipped in. The most widely used and perhaps the best remembered was Agent Orange, composed of equal parts 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T. Today, the term Agent Orange is used as a catch-all phrase to describe all these compounds. These herbicides were contaminated with minute amounts of 2,3,7,8 tetrachlorobenzo-P-dioxin, TCDD, a byproduct of the manufacturing process for 2,4,5-T. TCDD has a half-life of 8.7 years in humans. It is a persistent organic pollutant. After 25 years since the end of the Vietnam War, a quarter of the TCDD released through herbicide spraying is still in the Vietnamese environment. TCDD has been found to be biologically active at minuscule concentrations. The EPA currently regulates TCDD in drinking water at a concentration of 13 parts per quintillion. The dangers of dioxin were known as far back as the 1920s. There is no doubt that the US government and their chemical industry partners knew full well what the impact of Agent Orange would be on the future generations of a nation. Scientists that claimed that they didn't know were either totally uneducated in their chosen field, that they missed the obvious and vital evidence, or were paid by industry and government to lie. It has to be the latter. Dioxin is deadly. It changes the DNA of the human race. They have made substances that attack the child in what should be the most protective shroud of all species, the mother's womb. We are looking at physical manifestations of evil. If you want to make a difference, if you really want to fight evil, fight this. There is no greater evil than that which can harm an unborn child, the most defenseless and precious of all life. Pray by all means, pray for guidance, but I pray that your guidance leads you into positive action against one of the greatest menaces the world has ever witnessed. Fight this chemical industry. Fight the governments that uphold the chemical industry's ethos and philosophies. Fight them. They have created substances that destroy you on a molecular level. Here is author and journalist Robert Allen.
I got involved. Dioxin was the start of it. I got involved after a farmer in County Tipperary, near the River Suir, found that emissions from a nearby chemical factory were affecting his cattle and, as it turned out, affecting his family, including himself and his wife. Strangely enough, though, not his mother. And this became a saga, and it turned out that the problem was a faulty incinerator. And if you've got faulty incinerators in the 1970s, you've got dioxins and a whole load of other things. That was the start of it. But my emphasis has never really been on the toxic or even the health aspects. It's more the impact that this has on communities, that it has on families, it has it on individuals. So my emphasis has been less on the science. So for many years, I ended up finding myself in a very strange position where I was perceived by the industry to be some kind of antagonist. And I also ended up, somewhat ironically, doing work for some of the green groups with whom I didn't share much in common. In fact, I probably shared more in common with the industry, because I could see both sides of the story, which became an issue, particularly in Ireland in the 1970s, where people were saying, well, we'd rather have the jobs, even if it does mean that it's going to be a problem for our health, because it was a very emotional issue. So from that point of view, I could see both sides of the story. But primarily my concern has been communities, and all my books have been from that perspective. The greatest irony now is that I get more respect from industry than I actually get, certainly from the Greens. The Greens have ignored my work continually. I don't know why, even though they would use the work. Some of the work has ended up on university courses, so it benefits academia as well. But my gut feeling is that most of the time this just doesn't enter the public domain for lots of different reasons that are really hard to explain.
Right. And the book, that was called Guests of a Nation, yeah?
Well, the first book on the community, the book started off as being a book about community concern, about what I suppose you could call undesirable development. But it was just too broad, because it included everything from road license disputes to local post office closures, to things that might seem to be petty to other people. Most of them single issues. So in the end, what I decided to do was to focus in on the aspects that seemed to bring the communities together, although sometimes they drove them apart. And that meant that we were looking at the issues of foreign investment, and particularly foreign investment that brought in pharmaceutical and chemical factories. But we also looked at mining and a couple of other things as well. But yes, the book was originally called Guests of the Nation. And it was called Guests of the Nation because the states and the local authorities were responsible for bringing these companies in. And of course, this wasn't unique to Ireland. This was happening in other places. It was happening in Wales, it was happening in Scotland, and it was happening in other parts of Europe, in Romania, and it was also happening in Australia and Mexico. So it was a global thing. And in the 1970s and 1980s, it was a very, very big issue because a lot of these companies really didn't have any scruples. They thought they could buy their way in and buy their way out, and to a certain extent they manipulate the media in the way that it's easy to manipulate the media through the very simple medium of advertising revenue. So the communities never stood a chance. And the irony about this is, for me, is that it is interesting the impact that the books have had. But to be honest with you, I don't think that the books made a single bit of difference. I think being involved with the campaigns and sharing information has actually been more beneficial. So it becomes a live issue more than anything else.
Right. Let's get on to the subject of dioxin here, and I suppose we better sort of have a brief background of this substance and the way industry's doctored records about dioxins, and I suppose about PCBs in the past. Now there was an affair between Monsanto and Westinghouse. Now, do you know much about that?
Well, you're probably better off not to get into the specifics of what actually happened. Whilst Monsanto were one of the largest culprits, and whilst Monsanto, because of circumstances, did know more